So on July 1st, 2026, there was this single phrase that leaked to the press, and it basically wiped out billions of dollars in global wealth in just a few hours.
Right, yeah. The phrase was excess AI compute.
Exactly. Excess AI compute, which is crazy because for over a year, the entire tech narrative was built on this one solid, unshakable foundation, right? Like artificial intelligence computing power was the most scarce, most valuable resource on the planet. Everyone was just desperate for more.
Oh, absolutely. It was a gold rush.
And then suddenly Meta, the biggest buyer in the world by far, just announces they're launching a platform to sell off their extras. Like they were full, they didn't need it anymore.
And I mean, if that wasn't bad enough, the very next day, this leaked audio recording hits the internet. It was Mark Zuckerberg at an internal all-hands meeting, and he's just flatly telling his employees that AI agents were, well, they weren't accelerating as expected.
Which is just a massive red flag.
Huge. And the combination of those two events, it didn't just rattle the stock market. I mean, it triggered a global avalanche. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, the SOX, it plummeted over 6% right at the opening bell.
Wow. Well, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking into one of the most fascinating and honestly destructive periods in the global AI market. Our sources today are two incredibly detailed analyses from the YouTube channel, or Best Partner, which break down the scathing report from SemiAnalysis, as well as the market data from that massive July 2026 tech crash.
Yeah, our mission today is really to uncover how Meta's mind-boggling infrastructure spending spree inflated this global AI stock bubble, why that bubble violently popped, and honestly, the deeply hidden, shocking cultural dysfunctions inside Meta's multi-billion-dollar tech teams.
Right, because we're talking about a scenario where a single company's internal missteps triggered a global chain reaction. And it reveals some really hard truths about the actual state of this whole AI race. But, before we jump into the absolute carnage of July 2026, since we were talking so much about market volatility today, a quick tip for you listening.
Oh, right, the trackers.
Yeah. If you want to track total market temperature yourself without relying on the crazy hype cycle, welcome to search and download the iOS app Buffett Indicator from the Apple App Store or Bubble Watch from Google Play. And also, to access more advanced researches, applications, and our latest Deep Values agents, welcome to explore and join the Deep Values app. You can find that at the Apple App Store link in our show notes. It's apps.apple.com/us/app/deepvalues and so on. Check the notes for the full link.
Perfect. And I should probably just add our standard disclaimer here too, right? So all analysis is based on publicly available sources and may be subject to revisions or differing interpretations. All contents from this channel is for research and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute any investment or financial advice or service. Conduct your own due diligence before making investment or financial decisions.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get into the fallout of that leaked audio because the panic, it wasn't just contained to Wall Street. Like if you look at South Korea.
South Korea got hammered.
Yeah, the KOSPI index suffered its worst single-day drop since the 1998 Asian financial crisis.
Yeah.
It went down almost 11%. Heavyweights like Samsung and SK Hynix, their valuations just completely cratered. And the sources point out that this was particularly devastating for retail investors in South Korea.
Right, the ant investors, as they call them.
Exactly, because they were heavily leveraged. Over 400,000 retail accounts faced immediate margin calls.
Yeah, and for anyone unfamiliar with the mechanics of a margin call, it is a brutal, brutal financial reality. Basically, these retail investors had borrowed money from their brokers to buy more tech stock, essentially betting that the AI boom would just, go up forever.
Because everyone said it would.
Right. But when Meta's announcement sent the stock prices into a free fall, those brokers demanded immediate cash to cover the loans. And when the investors couldn't pay, the brokers automatically liquidated their accounts. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people had their savings wiped out in seconds. China's A-share tech sector also tanked. It was just an indiscriminate sell-off.
The analogy that always comes to mind for me here is it's like someone running into a sports stadium, right? And they aggressively buy up every single hot dog, jersey, foam finger, whatever at a 1,000% markup.
Like just throwing cash everywhere.
Yeah. And the vendors, they think, oh, wow, this is the new normal. We're rich. But then suddenly that guy blows a whistle, says, actually, I'm bored. Anyone want to buy my extras? And walks out the door. The entire local stadium economy just collapses. But the question is, how did the entire global market get so inextricably linked to just Meta's buying habits in the first place?
Well, to understand that gravitational pull, we really have to trace the narrative back to 2025 and early 2026. Meta pushed their AI capital expenditure, which is, their budget for buying physical hardware and building data centers to an astronomical $125 billion to $145 billion.
Which is just a number so big it's hard to even process.
It really is. I mean, that single company accounted for nearly 1/5 of the entire United States tech sector's AI investment. They were single-handedly keeping the lights on at multiple hardware manufacturers.
Let's put that $145 billion into perspective for a second. That is roughly the entire gross domestic product of a small country like Morocco, entirely dedicated to buying servers and chips.
Wow. Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
And it wasn't just hardware, right? They signed over $100 billion in external compute contracts. And they handed $60 billion of that to AMD alone.
Just massive, massive contracts.
They paid $143 million for a mere 49% stake in Scale AI. And my favorite crazy stat, we're talking about $100 million signing bonuses handed to individual researchers from OpenAI just to get them to walk across the street.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, this brings us to a crucial economic mechanism called the anchoring effect. Meta wasn't just, participating in the AI market. By throwing around what appeared to be an infinite, bottomless budget, they were setting a completely irrational price anchor for the rest of the world.
Right, the anchor.
Yeah. In behavioral economics, anchoring happens when people rely way too heavily on the first piece of information they receive. Yeah. Like, if you go to buy a house, and the first one you tour is some mediocre teardown listed for $10 million, a $5 million house down the street suddenly feels like a bargain, even if it's really only worth $1 million.
Oh, that makes total sense. So when venture capitalists and institutional investors were looking at other AI startups, their baseline for what was normal was completely warped by Mark Zuckerberg's checkbook.
Exactly. Companies like CoreWeave and Nebius, they saw their valuations skyrocket simply because they existed in the same ecosystem that Meta was aggressively inflating. The market collectively assumed that, well, if the biggest, most data-rich buyer in the world was willing to pay these exorbitant prices, they must know something we don't. This must be the new normal.
But then the reality check arrived. We have to ask why Meta suddenly retreated from that massive anchor they created. And the underlying issue, according to the sources, was that their actual product, the Llama 4 model, severely underperformed expectations.
It really did. When Llama 4 was released, it faced widespread criticism from the developer community. I mean, there were serious allegations that the model was essentially cheating on benchmark tests.
And just to clarify, cheating on benchmarks in AI basically means the model was over-optimized for the specific data sets used to grade it, but it lacked actual generalized reasoning skills.
Right, it's not actually smart.
Exactly. It's the equivalent of a student memorizing the answer key to a standardized test without actually learning the underlying math. Sure, they score 100%, but if you ask them to solve a real-world problem, they just freeze. In practical application, Llama 4 was lagging noticeably behind frontier models from OpenAI, Anthropic, and even DeepSeek.
So Meta was spending the most money by a massive margin, but they were not producing the best model. And if we look at the historical context, this is actually a recurring behavioral pattern for Meta's leadership. Massive, flashy spending sprees are often a smokescreen for internal panic.
Oh, like the metaverse pivot?
It's exactly.
Yeah.
In 2021, Mark Zuckerberg famously renamed the entire company to Meta and burned over $70 billion on Reality Labs to build the metaverse.
Right, and that metaverse pivot was a direct reaction to missing the transition to native mobile apps and getting completely outflanked by TikTok in the short video era. Like Horizon Worlds, their flagship VR product, it barely had any users compared to gaming platforms like Roblox, yet they were spending tens of billions on it.
Yeah, and this AI spending spree was the exact same playbook. It wasn't a calculated strategic masterstroke, it was a panic buy. Zuckerberg was just terrified of missing the next technological paradigm shift, so he decided to buy every available piece of hardware to ensure he had a seat at the table, regardless of whether his teams actually knew what to do with it.
Okay, let's pause here and unpack this a bit. I want to push back on this narrative because even if Llama 4 wasn't great right out of the gate, Meta is legendary for its engineering talent. I mean, their motto used to be, move fast and break things. Surely, possessing all this custom hardware, securing all these chips, and having total control over their supply chain gives their internal engineers a massive structural advantage to just iterate and build Llama 5, right? Like,
Yeah.
They have the tools.
You would think so, right? But the semi-analysis report detailed in our sources forcefully dismantles that assumption. Simply owning hardware doesn't give you an advantage if your internal infrastructure strategy is a complete disaster.
Really, a disaster.
Oh, a total disaster. If the infrastructure you build is fundamentally misaligned with the people actually writing the AI models, all that money just goes up in smoke. And the sources outline 3 specific cases of this internal dysfunction. starting with the Rivos acquisition.
Okay, this one is wild. I read this part. So Meta spent $2.5 billion to acquire a chip startup called Rivos. And Rivos is built around RISC-V, which is an open source hardware instruction set architecture.
Right.
Think of RISC-V as a freely available blueprint for building a computer chip, unlike the proprietary blueprints controlled by companies like ARM or Intel. But Meta bought them primarily to acquire what's called customer-owned tooling.
Yeah, and customer-owned tooling is essentially the logistical and software capability to manage chip manufacturing yourself, directly with the fabrication plan so you don't have to rely on a middleman. But the absurdity here is the price tag.
The $2.5 billion.
Yes. Building that specific tooling capability from scratch internally at Meta would have cost roughly $100 million and taken about a year. Instead, they spent $2.5 billion. They overpaid by $2.4 billion just for a logistical capability.
Which is insane. But you might think, well, at least they got the startup's cutting-edge chip designs and their brilliant engineering team, right?
Nope.
No. Meta immediately canceled the actual chip project Rivos was working on. Rivos had insisted on an all-or-nothing sale, meaning Meta had to buy every single employee, even though they only wanted a tiny fraction of the logistics team. The sources use a brilliant analogy here.
Oh, the F1 analogy. I love this one.
It's so good. They said it's like buying a championship Formula One team, but when they arrive at your headquarters, you put the drivers in the accounting department, you put the aerodynamics engineers in marketing, and you stick the pit crew in HR. And then management stands around screaming, asking why the company isn't winning car races.
It was an immediate organizational rejection of a transplant. Other departments inside Meta just started cannibalizing the startup, grabbing engineers to build their own internal fiefdoms. A huge chunk of those highly specialized engineers ended up leaving in frustration or just getting laid off.
That's rough.
And that is just case one. Case two, the Grand Teton server, shows an even deeper disconnect between the people buying the hardware and the people actually using it.
Okay, so the infrastructure team at Meta designed a highly customized server for the Open Compute project, codenamed Grand Teton, and they made this unilateral decision to add an entire extra switch tray to the server design. This included 4 Broadcom PCIe switches and 16 extra solid-state drives.
Right, and a PCIe switch is basically a high-speed data highway interchange inside the server, directing traffic between the processors and the storage.
So why did they add it?
Well, the infrastructure team's logic was that the AI model training teams were going to need massive amounts of local physical storage right there on the servers to save their model checkpoints. Because training an AI model takes months, so you have to constantly save your progress or checkpoint it, so a power outage doesn't wipe out $1 million of compute time.
Which, I mean, sounds totally logical on paper, right?
On paper, sure. But they never actually asked the AI model team if they needed local storage. The infrastructure team just assumed they knew best. So when they rolled these hyper-expensive custom Grand Teton servers into production, the model team barely even touched that extra storage. They preferred saving their checkpoints to a centralized network storage system instead.
So the entire custom design was a colossal waste.
A huge waste. It made the server significantly more expensive, physically hotter, and more complex to maintain, all to support a feature the end user explicitly did not want. The design was eventually just scrapped entirely.
It's textbook lack of co-design. It's like they basically built a massive industrial walk-in freezer for a tenant who eats out for every single meal. They were burning electricity to keep empty shelves cold.
That's the perfect way to describe it.
But as bad as that is, case 3 is definitely the most damaging for Meta's AI ambitions, hobbling their own Ferraris.
Oh yeah, this one is painful. Meta has this obsessive culture of customizing hardware, but historically they customize it to favor their legacy business, the recommendation systems that power the Facebook and Instagram feeds. And a recommendation system requires a massive amount of CPU power, or central processing units.
Okay.
That's because the algorithm is constantly doing table lookups, searching through massive databases of your past clicks, and likes to figure out what reel to show you next.
But generative AI, like ChatGPT or Llama, operates on a totally different mechanical level. It requires massive GPU power graphics processing units and incredible memory bandwidth. A large language model isn't just looking up past data, it is running billions of complex, parallel mathematical calculations simultaneously to predict the next logical word in a sentence. GPUs are designed for that massive parallel processing, but they need to talk to each other constantly at lightning speed.
Exactly. But Meta's infrastructure managers, they forced a custom server design called Ariel for NVIDIA's cutting-edge GB200 chips. And against all logic for generative AI, they insisted on a 1-to-1 ratio of CPUs to GPUs. They deliberately bottleneck the system to serve their old ad-targeting workloads, basically starving the GPUs of the data they need to train efficiently.
And they did the exact same thing to AMD.
Yes.
They ordered AMD to take their absolute bleeding-edge MI450 chip, which is an engineering marvel designed purely for AI, and literally demanded that AMD cut its compute dies and high-bandwidth memory layers in half.
It's just absurd. High bandwidth memory, or HBM, is the ultra-fast memory stacked directly on top of the GPU that allows the chip to access the data it needs instantly.
Cutting that in half is like taking a Ferrari engine and installing a fuel line from a lawnmower. It doesn't matter how fast the engine can go if it can't get any gas. The most fascinating part of this, though, is the internal reaction. Meta actually has a dedicated frontier model lab, the TBD lab. These are the people whose literal job is to build the next generation of AI. How did they react to being handed this deliberately downgraded hardware?
They absolutely despised it. The TBD lab wasn't even consulted before these multi-billion-dollar hardware decisions were locked in by the infrastructure procurement team. The AI scientists are looking at this incredibly expensive, highly customized, yet severely underpowered infrastructure, and they want absolutely no part of it.
It's crazy.
The internal warfare is so bad that the semi-analysis report actually publicly urged AMD to bypass Meta's infrastructure managers entirely and try to sell the proper, full-strength chips directly to the TBD lab.
So the procurement department is actively fighting a war against the engineering department, armed with billions of dollars. Here's what I want to know. Why are some of the smartest, most highly compensated engineers in the world making such terrible, disjointed hardware decisions?
Well, the root cause isn't technical incompetence. These are smart people. The issue is a deeply toxic corporate culture at Meta AI, driven by their human resources structure. Specifically, their performance review cycle and their reliance on brutal stack ranking.
Stack ranking. That's an HR philosophy where managers are forced to grade their employees on a bell curve, right? No matter how incredible the team is, you are mathematically required to label a certain percentage of them as bottom performers.
Yes. And at Meta, they are cutting the bottom 10 to 15% of staff every single review cycle.
Every cycle. That's brutal.
It is. And furthermore, those performance reviews happen every 6 months. Now think about the mechanical timeline of hardware development. Designing a custom silicon chip, securing fabrication space at TSMC, and building a new data center architecture that takes 3 to 4 years of sustained, focused effort.
You literally cannot drive long-term infrastructure projects with a 6-month survival of the fittest performance cycle. It creates an environment where everyone is just optimizing for their next review.
Exactly. The sources refer to this cultural phenomenon as window washing. Middle managers are terrified of falling into that bottom 10% and losing their jobs. So instead of undertaking quiet, necessary 3-year foundational work, they force through highly visible, flashy, short-term projects that look fantastic on a quarterly presentation.
Wow.
They wash the windows so the house looks shiny right now. They secure their massive bonuses, they survive the HR call, and then they immediately abandon the long-term execution of that project to start the next shiny thing.
Oh, I see. So they get all the credit for launching the spaceship, but they suffer zero consequences when it blows up halfway to Mars because they've already transferred to a new department.
Precisely. And because of this chaos, the supply chain teams have absolutely zero power. They are constantly jerking outside vendors around, ordering huge custom chip designs, and then canceling the orders a few months later when a new manager takes over.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Nobody dares challenge the senior leadership on this structural flaw. The sources mention a detail about the day-to-day reality at Meta that I think perfectly encapsulates this dysfunction. Despite spending $145 billion on servers, many software engineers don't even have assigned desks.
Well, the desk thing, yeah, that is wild.
You have these highly paid, elite AI engineers wandering around the office every morning like they are at a busy coffee shop looking for a place to sit. When they finally find an empty desk, sometimes the monitors have the wrong display cables, or there are no monitors at all. And when they apply through the internal system to get a dedicated desk, they get denied by automated HR software, even though there are empty desks visible all around them.
It really is the ultimate microcosm of the macro problem. If a trillion-dollar company cannot successfully provision a simple desk and a working monitor for an engineer, how can they possibly be trusted to successfully provision a $100 billion custom AI data center? You have a thoroughly disjointed organization making hardware decisions that will define the next decade of technology.
Right. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway here is a massive reality check on the AI industry. In the era of $100 billion hyperscalers, simply throwing mountains of cash at hardware is not enough.
No, it's really not.
In fact, If your corporate incentives are misaligned, that money is actively destructive. If an infrastructure team is building systems based on the legacy workloads the company needed 5 years ago, and they aren't communicating with the scientists writing the AI models of tomorrow, those billions of dollars just vanish into thin air.
Yeah, and it proves that in the AI boon, the biggest buyer is absolutely not the smartest buyer. Understanding the cultural rot that can fester beneath a trillion-dollar market valuation is critical for anyone trying to navigate or invest in this space. It is a stark reminder to look past the hype and focus on the actual mechanics of execution.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with today. We've just detailed how the initial infrastructure of this entire global AI revolution was built on an unstable foundation of panic buying, misaligned corporate incentives, and internal political turf wars. But what if this massive failure by the tech giants opens a completely different door?
Like a different paradigm for AI development.
Exactly. What if the next truly massive leap in artificial intelligence doesn't come from a trillion-dollar hyperscaler blindly throwing $100 billion at custom servers in some shiny mega campus? Because big tech's architecture is proving to be so bloated, inefficient, and economically toxic, the next breakthrough might actually come from a lean, cash-strapped startup operating out of a garage.
That's a fascinating point.
A team that doesn't have the luxury of wasting $1 billion on the wrong PCIe switches and therefore is forced to innovate incredibly efficient, hyper-focused software to run on standard hardware. Necessity breeds invention, and right now, the giants have absolutely no necessity.
It's entirely possible that limitless budgets are the exact thing killing innovation at the top.
Well, that's all for today's deep dive. Keep questioning the blueprints, track the real market, and we'll see you next time.